Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere profoundly quiet, into the slow, ink-scented world of medieval manuscript making, where the most dramatic thing that might happen is someone spilling ink and quietly repenting for the next 2 hours. If you're hoping to stay fully awake while we stroll through 12th century scriptoria, watch monks sharpen quills with bone knives, and admire margins decorated with imaginary snails and armor, well, that's bold of you. You probably won't survive this level of calm. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where and when you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun isn't up yet, but the scriptorium is already breathing. You approach the stone building from the west, your sandals muffled by frost-crusted moss. The world around you is muffled too, trees still half asleep, wind not yet warmed, light barely gray. The door creaks open with a thick, wooden sigh, and you step inside. It smells like beeswax, cold ash, and parchment. Not paper, not ink, parchment, inside. The light comes from one narrow window, placed high to catch morning, and little else. Shadows stretch long across the room's stone floor. The benches are arranged in silent rows, and the air carries a hum, not a sound, but the memory of one, a stillness left behind by many hours of careful breath. You walk between the desks, each with its own small chair, candle stub, knife, quill, and brush. These aren't tools of urgency. They're instruments for shaping time. One scribe is already here, hunched slightly, robe gathered neatly around his knees. He runs a cloth over his desk with slow circles, not to clean, to begin. You notice how his eyes move across the grain of the wood, not rushing, not checking for flaws, just observing. There's a rhythm in the way he lifts his inkhorn from its shelf, sets it down, opens it with one twist of the wrist, a practiced routine, not performed, inhabited. He selects a feather from a row laid out beside him. Goose, perhaps, not dyed, not cut yet, just cleaned and cured. He holds it to the light, turns it slightly, then nods. This will be today's voice. Not every monk writes. Some illuminate, some bind, some prepare vellum in a separate room where the walls are spattered with lime and the smell is not relaxing. But here, in the scriptorium, the work is quieter. You find your own desk, low and angled. Your tools have been laid out a pumice stone, a block of lead for ruling lines, a tiny knife, a narrow brush, and one blank page, pale and luminous, stretched taut over a wooden frame. It took a calf to make that page. You don't rush to touch it. Instead, you rest your hands on your knees and breathe once, deeply. The morning is still early, and a good page might take hours. The scribe to your right begins to sharpen his quill. The sound is soft, papery. It's not the slicing of metal, it's the coaxing of shape from fiber. He works with a sliver of bone, slicing just enough from the nib to give it bite. Then he tests it on scrap, writing not letters, but loops, curves, flourishes, watching the ink flow, measuring drag and width. Satisfied, he begins, not with text, with ruling. A piece of lead is dragged across the parchment in faint lines, barely visible, but essential. The parchment is too alive for guidelines made by ink. These lines are for margins, for order, for breath between thoughts. This isn't about speed, it's about patience being given form. You look up once, and the window's light has shifted slightly. Not much, just enough to touch the rim of the inkhorn beside you. You lift your quill, not to write, to test. You dip it just barely, angle it over the scrap, and pull it across the surface in one clean stroke. It holds. The ink beads gently at the end, round and still. You're ready. No one speaks, no one needs to. The scriptorium has begun, not with ceremony, with breath and bone, and the first sound of ink touching skin. The sound of writing in the scriptorium is not a scratch. It's more like a sigh, drawn out through quill and parchment, quiet enough that it folds into the air rather than cutting through it. You sit, back straight, feet tucked close beneath your robe, and observe how each scribe works not in haste, but in hush. Before any letters are formed, there is ritual. The monk across from you finishes ruling his lines, then brushes his hand gently over the parchment, not to clean it, but to feel its surface. He leans forward and murmurs something, possibly a verse, possibly just a breath. Then he writes the first letter. It is large, deliberate, and solitary, a capital I perhaps, or a curling D. He doesn't continue immediately. He looks at the shape, considers the space around it. Then, only then, he moves to the next. Ink, at this stage, is not an afterthought. It's a craft in itself. You rise and step into the adjacent chamber, the ink room. Here, the smell is stronger, sharp, metallic, faintly sour. A mortar and pestle rest on the table, half full with black grit. Nearby, a shallow bowl of water with a sheen of oil on the surface. An apprentice stirs a mixture slowly, soot from burnt bones or lampblack, combined with water and a little wine vinegar, or sometimes gall from oak apples dissolved in rainwater. This is iron gall ink. It stains forever. The apprentice dips a feather into the mixture and draws a line on test parchment. It darkens slowly, the way twilight slips across a floor. He frowns, too pale. He adds more gall and stirs again. Not too much. It'll eat the page in a decade if it's too acidic. You ask nothing. He says nothing. He just nods, then hands you a pot, lid slightly askew so the ink can breathe, back in the scriptorium. You pass other desks. One scribe is working with red ink, minium, to highlight a name. The pigment is ground from lead oxide and glows softly, like embers that never quite cool. Another is preparing blue, lapis lazuli, scraped and soaked and bound with gum, a color so precious it could be traded for gold. It's used sparingly, a single letter, a flourish, a robe for a saint. You return to your seat and unstop your inkhorn. The first dip of the quill feels like waking a sleeping thought. You test it again, then begin, letter by letter. Not words, letters. You don't think about sentences or meaning. You focus on strokes, down, curve, lift, dot. The shape of the reach of L, the open jaw of G. You finish a line, not quickly, just patiently, then blow gently, your breath fanning the ink until it dries enough not to smudge. Some scribes will copy from a master book, called an exemplar. Others will work from memory, psalms, sermons, law codes, herbal remedies. You glance over and see a brother copying the Rule of St. Benedict, his eyes moving steadily from reference to page. Every so often, he closes them, whispers a line to himself, and continues. You make an error. A letter curves too short. The ink puddles slightly. You stop, not in panic, not in shame. You take your knife, small, sharp, clean, and gently scrape the surface of the parchment. Thin layers flake away, like frost from a window pane. The word disappears. You smooth the surface with bone. Try again. No one notices. Or if they do, they say nothing. Mistakes are not shameful here. They are part of the page. The bell sounds from the cloister, a soft clang, signaling the hour of terce. A few scribes pause. Others continue, lost in rhythm. You rest your quill, stretch your fingers, and notice how time has dissolved, not disappeared, just changed shape. The light in the window is brighter now. Dust motes rise in the sunbeam like thoughts too light to settle. You've written 3 lines. That's enough. The monk beside you leans back and exhales through his nose. His hands are ink-stained, his eyes clear. He dips his quill again. You do the same, because there is still ink in the pot, and still space on the page. You stretch your fingers beneath the desk, quietly, slowly, so the joints make no sound. The ink on your last line is dry now, faintly glossy in the angled morning light. When you tilt your head just so, the letters ripple like fish in a shallow stream. Your neighbor sneezes once into his sleeve, then offers a sheepish bow toward the room. No one responds, not out of coldness, just respect. Even a sneeze, here, knows its place in the order of things. You rise, not abruptly. You tuck your stool back with barely a whisper and walk through a narrow arch into the vellum chamber. The change in smell is immediate. This room smells less like ink, more like time, faint leather, drying lime, old wool, and damp stone. Hanging from a frame by wooden pegs are 2 stretched hides, pale, taut, translucent in parts. This is not leather, it's vellum, calfskin, scraped thin and dried under tension. A page before it's a page. A young assistant kneels on the floor, working a crescent-shaped knife over the surface of a nearly dry hide. The blade doesn't cut, it scrapes. He pulls it toward him slowly, removing the thinnest shavings of tissue, murmuring with concentration. The sound is soft, steady, like snowfall brushing against a window. You kneel beside him. He hands you the knife without speaking. You place your hand flat on the hide to steady it. It's cool, almost damp, but not wet. The knife skims across its surface in a soft shh, and a curl of translucent skin peels away. You collect the shavings in a wooden dish. They'll be used later, mixed with glue for bindings, or burned to ash for pale ink. Scraping vellum is not just a technical task, it's meditative, one stroke at a time. The skin becomes surface, the surface becomes story. You glance up. The hides move slightly in the air, tightening with each hour of drying. They groan softly on the frame. The room is filled with the faint tension of transformation. Before the parchment is ready, it must be pumiced, dusted with chalk or powdered pumice to remove oils and raise the grain. You watch as an older monk sprinkles chalk over a finished sheet and begins to rub gently in circular motion with a cloth-wrapped stone. Each stroke erases what the skin used to be, not to hide it, to prepare it for what it will hold. Some manuscripts are made from a dozen sheets, others hundreds, each one shaped, scraped, dried, and cut to fit inside the gathering of folios, each with grain, Imperfections, character. You return to the scriptorium with a stack of newly prepared pages. They're firm but flexible, their edges slightly curled. You stack them on your desk like folded thoughts waiting to unfold. Across the room, a scribe finishes a page. He stands, cradling it between both hands, and carries it to a shelf where drying pages rest upright in wooden slots. He inserts it gently between two blocks of clean wool and lowers a stone weight on top. No rush. Some pages need weeks to flatten. The light in the room shifts again. You barely notice. The sun has moved far enough that it touches the far wall, illuminating a faint patch of fresco. A lion, half faded, holding a scroll. You look down at your blank vellum, run your fingers across its surface. Not cold anymore. Now it feels like silence with texture. You pick up your ruling lead, begin drawing lines, margins, columns, breadth. The parchment receives the lines without resistance. You tilt your head, ensuring symmetry, then blow gently across the surface. Chalk dust rises like mist and drifts to the floor, somewhere in the building. A bell rings again. Mid-morning, you don't stop. The work doesn't interrupt prayer. The work is prayer. A fringe theory once suggested that vellum pages held residual energy, that because they once lived, they absorbed something of the scribe's breath, the maker's intention, that the act of writing was not just inscription, but infusion. You don't know if that's true, but it feels right. You dip your quill. The ink clings with just the right weight. The first letter blooms against the vellum, and the page, no longer skin, begins to breathe in words. You don't realize how long you've been writing until the inkhorn feels lighter and your hand, finally, pauses of its own accord. You set the quill down, carefully, not because it's fragile, but because it deserves the pause. Across from you, a younger scribe is mixing more ink. His brow is furrowed, but not in frustration, in focus. He leans over a small bowl, grinding iron sulfate crystals into a black solution with deliberate, steady circles. He adds vinegar next, only a few drops, then gum arabic, thick and sticky. The mixture swirls slowly before settling into stillness again. This is not chemistry. This is patience that stains. You move closer, watching as he tests the batch on scrap. A fine line appears, gray at first, then darkens, not instantly. It grows into blackness, like something remembering what color is. He nods, satisfied. He pours the ink into a horn cup, with a lip just high enough to discourage accidents, but shallow enough to invite frequent dipping. A wooden lid rests lightly on top, not sealed, just enough to shield the surface from dust and air. You offer a quiet bow of thanks and take the cup back to your desk. When you sit again, you notice the little things, a splotch of dried ink on the corner of your sleeve, a tiny groove forming in your quill from repeated sharpening, the faint roughness of chalk still clinging to the margin of your parchment. All signs of progress, all evidence of craft. You dip your quill, now fully conscious of the weight of that action. The ink clings differently, newer, thicker, slightly glossy. You test it. The stroke is smooth. You continue. Your letters come more easily now. The movement is not automatic, but flowing. Not mechanical, musical. Downstroke, lift, curve, pause. Each letter receives its full shape. No rush to finish a word. No hunger for punctuation. Just one form giving rise to the next. From the corner of your eye, You see another scribe pause mid-line, close his eyes, and mutter something under his breath, not out of fatigue, so out of reverence. He writes sacred texts. Every word is an echo of something older. You don't need to know which prayer he's copying. You can feel its rhythm. The scriptorium is warmer now. The sun has climbed high enough that the narrow window floods your row with angled light. The dust particles drift more visibly, flickering in slow spirals. The golden glow softens the page in front of you. The ink still glistens in places, catching the light like water pooled in shallow wells. The monk to your left is testing pigments today. A row of tiny pots sits in front of him, deep red from cinnabar, pale green from verdigris, rich blue from lapis lazuli, scraped and washed and bound with egg white. He dips a fine brush into the red and begins painting the capital Q that starts the page. His hand doesn't tremble. He breathes once before he touches the brush to the page. The shape begins, slowly curling, thickening as it bends, tapering off into a loop. He will take the rest of the hour to complete just that one letter, maybe longer. You glance at your own page. Your margins are straight, your text evenly spaced, your letters clean, though not mechanical. No flourishes yet. Those come later. Not every page is illuminated, but every page holds light. A fringe theory, mentioned in a quiet article buried in a book few people read, claims that early scribes considered each page to be a mirror, not of themselves, but of their obedience to time. That to work with ink was to write in concert with eternity. You don't know if that's quite true, but right now, it feels possible. The ink begins to dry faster now. You pause to stir it. A gentle movement with the tip of your quill. You don't speak, but the act says I am still here. I am still making. The page hears you. You keep writing. The light inside the scriptorium has shifted again, tilted a little lower, softened by the slow descent of the sun and the accumulation of quiet hours. You stretch your shoulders slightly, not in protest, just acknowledgement. The work has weight, but it's a gentle weight, like the weight of a blanket laid across your knees by someone who knows you're staying a while. Before you write the next line, you pause. Not because you've forgotten the words, but because you want to remember how to begin them. At the next desk over, a scribe prepares for something different. His parchment has no text, not yet, just the faint ghost of ruled lines and a large blank space near the top left. This will be a decorated initial, the kind that blooms across 3 lines of text and anchors a page with both color and calm. He begins not with ink, with pencil and soft strokes, drawn with a fine lead stylus. The letter is sketched lightly, a winding R that curves into itself like a vine. Nested with room for decoration, he adds a border around it, just slightly off square, intentional. Nothing symmetrical in medieval margins ever truly meant to be. From a wooden box, he pulls small pots of color, mineral pigments, bound with egg yolk or fish glue, stirred until creamy. A red that hums like faded brick, a blue that hums like twilight, and a gold, not paint, but powder, gold leaf, hammered so thin it flutters if you breathe too hard. You watch. The scribe dips a brush into gesso and paints a narrow strip into the shape of a vine leaf curled inside the R. He waits. It dries to a dull white. Then, holding his breath, he presses the gold leaf into place. It adheres instantly delicate but firm. The excess flakes off as he brushes it gently with squirrel hair, and suddenly the page holds sunlight. He moves on, not to paint more gold, but to deepen the letter's shape. Tiny dots of red at each curve. A small bird tucked into the stem, one foot curled around the serif, as if resting. This is illumination, not because it glows, though it does, because it makes the page more than readable. It makes it memorable. Your own page is plain by comparison, but not lesser. You turn it slowly, carefully, and begin ruling the next sheet. The lead moves across the parchment with a faint drag, not resistance, texture, the way a garden resists a rake just enough to feel real. You lift your quill, begin the next line. This one includes a name, important, so you write it in red. Your hand slows for these letters, not for decoration, for reverence. The term rubric comes from this, from the red, from the practice of marking notations, titles, or sacred words in a color that gently reminds the reader here. You pause, you write, you breathe. The gold letter scribe to your left is painting ivy now, tiny tendrils curling into the margin. The leaf shapes are not perfect. Each one leans slightly, bends at a different point, but together they weave a pattern that looks deliberate, alive. Illumination was rarely exact. Its beauty came from balance, from tension softened by play, a fringe interpretation tucked into a margin of a mid-20th century manuscript studies journal. Once argued that medieval manuscript art had more in common with jazz than architecture, that the point was never precision, the point was presence. You watch your ink settle into the page. You press a blotting cloth gently over one line, not enough to lift the words, just to encourage drying. You notice that the tip of your quill has begun to fray. It will need trimming soon, but not yet. It still writes. The light from the window dims further. One candle is lit at the far end of the room, then another. The stone walls reflect none of it, but the gold on the letter R catches fire. The page glows, not for display, but because it has been touched. You lift your pen again, ink pools just right at the tip, and you continue, each letter a soft breath toward the sacred. The room has begun to change color, not through paint, or ink, or gilding, but through light itself. The narrow windows, once crisp with morning sun, now filter a soft amber that bends across the stones like syrup poured too slowly. You notice it most where it falls across a stack of finished pages, edges glowing, corners curled just slightly as the parchment exhales into evening. You lay your quill down, not finished, just pausing, across the room. A scribe leans forward with a knife, not the bone-handled scraper used to correct mistakes, but a finer blade. He draws it along the edge of a page, not cutting deep, just thinning a corner that warped during drying. His strokes are measured, his focus complete. There's something quieting in that, how he works not to fix a flaw, but to give the page ease. You walk toward him, not to speak, to observe. He smiles without lifting his eyes. A small gesture, more breath than expression. You watch him adjust to the page, rotate it, run his fingers down its length. The knife moves again, this time in the opposite direction. A soft curl of vellum peels up and clings to his fingertip. He presses it into a scrap pile, thin shavings that will be saved, repurposed into glue or sizing or, In some cases, pigment binder. Nothing is wasted here. Even the edges have afterlives. You return to your own desk and see it now, your own page, inked and ruled and waiting. But it has a problem. One letter in the second line dips too low, a descending stroke that veered slightly left, touching the guideline below. It doesn't break the text, but it disrupts the rhythm. You don't panic. Instead, you reach for your knife, very gently. You place the edge against the stroke and scrape. Tiny fragments lift, not erased, lifted, as if the page were remembering a different shape beneath. Once the line is thin enough, you redip your quill, not to rewrite the letter, but to guide it. A new curve, a smaller one, aligned. You breathe again. There's a superstition among scribes that mistakes caught and repaired hum differently on the page, that the surface, once disturbed, becomes slightly more alive. You can't hear it, but you can feel it. That subtle tension beneath the words, that pause. You turn the page over to check for seepage. None. The back is clean. You smile. A few desks away, a different kind of work begins. Binding. A monk, older, robes darker with age and polish, lays out a stack of folded gatherings. Each is made of 4 sheets, folded in half, creating 8 leaves. He aligns them by touch, taps the edge twice on the desk, then threads a needle through the center fold. Stitching is silent, but not invisible. The thread is linen, waxed with beeswax, smooth enough to slide, strong enough to hold. He ties a knot just tight enough, then folds the next gathering into place. You approach and kneel beside him. He hands you a bundle. Your task is to press. You stack the gatherings between 2 wooden boards, wrap them in linen, and place a stone weight on top. Not heavy enough to crush, just heavy enough to remind them what shape to take. This is not flattening. This is listening. You hear the bell in the distance, vespers approaching. Time to stop soon. But the work hasn't hurried. It's simply folded itself into the shape of the day. You rise, stretch again. The air has cooled slightly, and the candles burn taller now, their wax pooling softly around brass bases. You return to your seat, blot your last line, roll your neck, and then begin to tidy. The quill is wiped clean and placed into its groove. The inkhorn is sealed. The blotting cloth is folded twice and laid across your page. You look once more at what you've written. You can't read it as quickly now. You're too close to it. But the shape is there, and the silence it holds is just as true as the words. The candles have grown taller, only in shadow, melting slowly, but seeming to rise as the light outside disappears altogether. The stone walls have cooled. You feel it in your fingertips when you brush them against the edge of your desk. Not cold, just settled. The day is not quite done, but the scriptorium is exhaling. You rise once more, walking with quiet steps down the narrow corridor that connects to the illuminator's chamber, a smaller room off to the side, lit more by fire than sun. Here, work is slower, stranger, more colorful. A scribe sits hunched over a page, unlike any other in the monastery. It's not full of prayer, it's full of animals. In the margins of a passage about patience, a squirrel lounges in a hammock. Along the edges of a psalm, a knight in full armor jousts a snail with comedic dignity. Between verses, a cat plays a lute while a fox naps under a grapevine. This is not vandalism. This is delight. Marginalia, the whimsical, bizarre, an often inexplicable art that slips between the borders of the sacred and the serious, a tradition not authorized exactly, but not condemned either, a place where the serious work of salvation could make room for an archer hiding in a tulip. You kneel beside the artist. He doesn't stop painting. He nods once in greeting and continues. You observe the tip of his brush dipping into a dish of pigment made from crushed red lead and egg yolk. The squirrel's ears are colored next, with tiny strokes, no larger than a grain of rice. There's a chicken in a cloak to the left of the page. You stifle a smile. These images don't mock the text, they cradle it. The contrast is not irreverent, it's essential. Even the most devout monks, those who copied sermons with ink-stained hands and slept on wooden planks, understood the need for play. The margins were the only place they could stretch. The illuminator turns the page and shows you another, a fish with antlers, dancing beside a monk who seems entirely aware of his own ridiculousness. This one's new, he whispers. His voice is hoarse from disuse, but his smile is clear. You thank him silently and return to your desk, where your own manuscript now waits in soft candlelight. The page you just finished holds no animals, no dancing cats, but it has space in the margins, and you're tempted. Just a small leaf, a spiral, maybe a mouse, not to draw attention, just to offer company to the words. You dip your brush, not the quill this time, and mix a bit of brown and red, making a shade not found in any known creature, but perfect for something with whiskers and long ears. You begin in the corner, a tail first, then ears, then a small eye that looks left, as if it has read the entire page and found it satisfactory. The mouse stays quiet, but its presence lightens the space around the sacred. This is the paradox of medieval manuscripts, every page meant to lift the soul, and yet grounded so often in human humor, curiosity, and softness, margins full of life. Not because the scribes were bored, because they were human, a fringe theory, rarely cited but quietly compelling, suggests that marginalia served as mental release, a kind of psychological counterbalance to the gravity of the text, a way for the scribe to mark yes. I see the weight of this work, but I am still here too. You finish your mouse, let it dry, then set the brush down. Across the room, the illuminator begins to pack away his pigments. He wraps each shell-shaped dish in cloth, tightens the corks on small pots of blue and green, and brushes flecks of gold dust back into a sealed jar. Nothing wasted, even in play. There is care. You fold your own tools gently. The quill rests on its side, the inkhorn capped, the parchment aligned neatly beneath a pressing board. Tomorrow, it will lie flatter, smoother, more itself. Tonight, it rests. You look once more at the mouse. It says nothing, but you're certain it approves. The scriptorium grows quiet in a new way, not as if it's falling asleep, but as if it has settled into the final chapter of its breath. The pages lie stacked or drying. The scribes sit back. A few rest their heads in their palms, not dozing, just listening to the evening arrive. You remain at your desk, tracing your fingers along the edge of your last completed folio. You lift it gently. It crackles faintly, still drying, but mostly cured. The ink no longer smudges. The mouse in the corner, your quiet companion, is fully dry now, its curled tail a perfect arc of humor, Across the room, another scribe lets out a faint sigh as he notices a blot on the final word of his page. He doesn't curse, he doesn't groan. He just retrieves the knife. Scraping errors from vellum has become second nature, but this one is different. The ink has pooled, soaked slightly deeper into the fibers. Too much gall. He scrapes gently, then gently again. But the mark resists, rather than force the page to obey. He pauses. You watch as he takes a piece of clean parchment and trims it down, a patch. He moistens its edge with a bit of warm breath, then pastes it softly over the error, pressing gently with the flat of his palm. A repair. Visible, but honest. That's how errors are handled here, with acknowledgement, with calm. You walk to the windowsill now. Outside, the dark has arrived fully. You see nothing but the suggestion of trees swaying. Occasionally, a star winks through the high clouds. There's no glass in the window, just open stone. Cold air drifts in, and the candles flicker as if to make room for it. You return to your desk and gather your materials. Pages, quill, knife, cloth, but your hand hesitates. You still have one unfinished folio, and something in you is not ready to leave it behind. You pull it forward. The first letter, already marked in red, a simple S at the start of a phrase half remembered. You dip your quill, and as you move to write, the tip snags. Too wide, too dry. You trim it carefully, slowly, one thin shaving of feather at a time. Then you dip again, test on a corner, smoother now. The line continues. Each letter emerges from your hand like something remembered from childhood, natural, inevitable, but surprisingly fresh. You complete the sentence, then lean back. The room around you glows, not brightly, but completely. Each scribe lit by his own small candle, each pool of light steady, warm, and filled with intention. There's no urgency to finish, just an understanding that the work will resume tomorrow. In one corner, a tall figure begins collecting the finished pages. He places each between woolen cloths and slips them into the press, a heavy wooden frame with a screw top. Turned slowly until the stack gives a soft sigh of pressure. This is how books are made, not with printing presses, not yet. With hands, with days, with hundreds of small acts of attention, and with quiet repairs. You take a moment to look over a page finished by another scribe, a longer text, densely written, with only small gaps between the lines. But in the bottom corner is a scratch, faint, thin, maybe made by the quill's edge or the sharp lift of a wrist. And beside it, a tiny drawing, a monk, arms folded, asleep, leaning on an invisible desk. You smile, even in the most sacred work. There's room for honesty. A fringe commentary in a 14th century collection once said, "A tired hand honors God more than a fast one." It was written in the margin of a prayer book, and for centuries scholars thought it was a complaint. But now, most believe it was admiration. You look down at your own hands, stained slightly, a little stiff, still ready. You close your book of tools and wrap it in cloth, not for protection, but for pause. And as the room darkens further, and the final candles are pinched out, the silence grows thick again, not the silence of emptiness. Night in the scriptorium is different from night anywhere else. It doesn't arrive with finality. It seeps in, through the stones, the rafters, the joints in the shutterless windows, like ink drawn into a dry brush. There's no extinguishing of noise. There wasn't much to begin with, just the gradual shifting of tasks into memory. You're one of the last to leave. The other scribes have folded away their tools, some murmuring soft blessings over the pages, others merely nodding to themselves as they stepped away from their benches. No announcement, no final bell, only the quiet clatter of a stool being righted, a quill placed spine down in its cup, the unmistakable hush of finished breath. And you linger, not to finish anything, just to stay in the room a little longer. You reach for one of the older books in the shelf near the door. Its spine is bare, no title, no decoration, just cracked leather, slightly stretched where a strap once held it closed. You lift it gently and sit by the candle closest to the window, where the breeze dances along the flame but never quite snuffs it. The book creaks when you open it. The pages smell of dust, iron ink, and time. The script is uneven, older than yours, less practiced, but not unsteady. You can almost feel the hands that made it, the way their strokes shifted depending on whether the candle burned too low or the morning frost made their joints ache. You flip to the margin of one page and find an owl. Not a realistic owl, just two round eyes, a nose, and three feathers that could be wings or ears. It's perched on the tail of a letter P, someone's little secret. Another page holds a warning, not from the text, but the scribe cursed be he who steals me. It's not menacing, just tired. A fringe note in modern codicology suggests these scribal curses weren't about fear, but ownership of effort. When a book took years to make, threats of supernatural consequences weren't about theft. They were love letters written in frustration. Please leave this one alone. I gave it everything. You close the book slowly. The room has grown colder now. The candle dips and wavers, its wick almost bare. You carry the book back to its shelf and notice, just below it, a volume with a copper clasp. The latch is rusted, but intact. You press the release. Click. Not loud, but satisfying. That small sound, a book ready to open or ready to close, has its own place in this world. Here, books aren't simply read, they're respected, repaired, and in many cases, restrained. You've heard of chained libraries. This isn't one of them. But the idea makes sense. Some books were too precious to be trusted with freedom. They were tethered not out of paranoia, but out of reverence. And in the great scriptoria of old, volumes were locked in place not to deny knowledge, but to guarantee presence. You had to come to them on their terms. A candle sputters behind you. The wick finally collapses. You realize now there's only one flame left, and it's yours. You gather your tools, quill, cloth, knife, inkhorn, into a leather pouch, worn soft by long use. You roll up the page you were working on earlier, tie it with a strip of flax, and slide it gently into a flat drawer beneath the desk. It will dry fully overnight. You won't look at it again until morning. You pause before leaving, not out of reluctance, out of ritual. You look back once more at the benches, the dark shapes of unused parchment, the smell of drying pigment and faint smoke. Somewhere in the rafters, a bird stirs, perhaps a sparrow, or maybe a mouse in the thatch. They don't fear the books, they live among them. You bow your head, not a deep bow, not ceremonial, just a nod, like to an old friend who isn't quite asleep. Then you lift your candle and open the door. The night outside folds over you like the closing leaf of a heavy book. The cold hits first, not sharp, but insistent. It's the kind that makes breath visible and footsteps quieter. Your candle doesn't shiver much. The wind is low, just enough to sway the flame gently, casting dancing shadows across the stone path that leads away from the scriptorium. You walk slowly. The world here doesn't rush in darkness. The monastery is mostly asleep. A few windows glow with faint candlelight, perhaps a wakeful monk in study, or a novice reviewing the Psalms before morning's first bell. But no one moves across the grounds. Even the wind holds its breath around the walls. Your path curves toward the cloister, where arches frame the inner garden. You step beneath the vaulted ceiling, your sandals brushing against worn flagstones. Overhead, the vaults echo softly with your movement. The candle in your hand reflects in the shallow pool at the center of the courtyard, turning the surface into gold ink on black parchment. You pause at the fountain. It isn't running now. Winter has stilled it. A dusting of frost outlines its edge, catching the light like a gilded margin. You press your free hand gently to the stone. It's smooth, cooled by the air. But beneath it lies the memory of flow, of motion paused, not ended. You think again of the books, of how they're pressed closed when finished, and how, someday, they'll open again. Every book sleeps, but it remembers. You continue walking, past the refectory, past the dormitory stairs, toward a smaller building tucked into the side of the monastery wall. Its door is thick, studded with iron, worn down where countless hands have pushed it open. Yours joins them. Inside, warmer. A different kind of silence here. This is the bindery. You've only been here a few times, usually to deliver pages. But tonight, curiosity brings you in. The room is dim. Just two small lanterns hang from wooden beams. The scent is richer than in the scriptorium leather. Glue, oil, pressed wool, and paper dust. On a long table lies a half-finished book, not a scroll, a codex. Its spine is exposed, sewn with thick cords, ready to be tightened into place. To your right, wooden boards are stacked neatly, covers, cut from oak or chestnut, some wrapped already in leather, others bare, waiting. You approach the press. Its great screw has been turned down to hold two books beneath it, their bindings fresh. You turn your ear slightly and swear you can hear them creaking faintly, as if they're adjusting to this new form. Books aren't born, they're trained into shape. You move to the sewing frame, where signatures, folded gatherings of pages, are laced together by linen thread. The frame is simple wood, tension cords, a needle the size of your finger. You pick up a thread, waxed with beeswax. It smells faintly of honey and fire. This is where pages become a whole. You think of your own folio, still drying in the scriptorium drawer. Soon it will join others, not to be shelved, to be read, or sung, or opened quietly beside a candle late at night, by someone who has nothing else to reach for except the steady rhythm of letters. A fringe theory once proposed that the codex, the folded, bound book, was not simply a convenience, but a theological statement, a form that mirrored the sacred unity in many parts. Not scroll, not sequence, gathering. You sit beside the unfinished volume, not to work, just to be with it. The binding rests in its press, leather softens over wood, Clasps wait to be riveted into place. This book has no title yet, but it already has a spine. You rise again, blow gently on your candle, and step back outside. The stars are clearer now. The wind has slowed. You carry no book in your arms, but your hands still remember the curve of the page, and your breath still matches the hush of turned leaves. You follow the stone path along the monastery's outer wall, the hem of your robe brushing frost-laced grasses. The moon has risen now, pale and quiet, not bright enough to claim the landscape, just enough to silver its edges. Your candle burns lower, but it doesn't flicker. The wax has steadied. The flame knows its shape. You approach a heavy oak door, low, darkened with time, marked faintly by soot and oil. Above it, no sign, but you already know where it leads. The library. You lift the iron latch and step inside. At first, it's only shadow. The air smells of old parchment, dust, and candle soot. But once your eyes adjust, you see it, the long spine of the room, lined with shelves and anchored by heavy beams. There are books here, dozens, maybe hundreds, a river of stored breath, curled in pages and clamped in leather. The books are chained, not all, but most. Iron loops wind through their spines, connecting them to horizontal rods. The chains aren't heavy, just firm, long enough to allow reading at the desk, not long enough to carry them far. You run your hand along the chain of the nearest volume. It clinks softly, no tension, just presence. In the medieval world, chained libraries weren't cages, they were commitments, when a single book might take 2 years to make. It wasn't just valuable, it was responsible. The chain didn't prevent theft as much as it preserved a trust. You lift one of the books from its stand. The leather is warm from years of hands, though cool now. Brass corners keep its shape. The clasp is missing, broken, perhaps. But the pages remain whole. You open it. The script is smaller than what you've written, tight and careful, a hand trained to balance speed and legibility. There's a note in the margin, an apology from the scribe for copying too quickly that day. You smile. Even monks made excuses. Even monks wrote margin notes. You turn a page. A small drawing appears beside a psalm, just a cluster of stars, 6 dots in a ring, surrounded by tiny lines suggesting glow. No caption, no reason, just the sky, sketched by someone who had seen it enough to remember. You close the book. The chain clinks again as you settle it back into its cradle. The library breathes differently than the scriptorium. It's not filled with work. It's filled with waiting. These books aren't being written. They're resting, holding knowledge, holding silence, waiting for the next hand to reach for them. Some have not been opened in decades. Others are visited weekly. But none complain, none rust. They endure. You walk further down the aisle, brushing your fingers along spines thick with age. Some are vellum, some leather, some stitched visibly. All bear marks of being read, warped corners, faded gold, tiny fingerprints on the edges of pages. You think of how many lives have pressed against these texts, not to change them, but to meet them. You pause beside an open desk. The candle there is nearly gone, its base waxed to the wood. The book beside it is a herbal, filled with drawings of plants and soft script naming their properties. Wormwood, for distemper of the belly; chamomile, for calm, rosemary for clarity. You run your fingers beneath the line and imagine the monk who copied it, the one who paused to draw each leaf just right. Did they crush the herbs between their fingers while they worked? Did they drink them steeped at the end of a long day? You sit down for a moment. Let your own breath fall into rhythm with the room. Not deep, not slow, just even. The pages around you don't expect anything. They don't rush you. They don't whisper. They wait. A fringe account from a 15th century archivist wrote that books in a chained library were like monks themselves, bound and quiet, sturdy in devotion, generous to any who knelt before them. Perhaps they were right. You rise again. The candle in your hand is nearly gone. You take one last glance at the room, not to remember it, but to thank it. Then step back into the night. The wind has stilled. The moon holds its place, and your footsteps make no sound as you walk slowly toward the dormitory door, carrying nothing but the silence books give back. You step back into the monastery's outer corridor, the cold greeting you like an old companion who no longer bothers to knock. The path is darker now. Your candle has burned low, only a stub clutched between your fingers, and the stars do the rest of the work. You don't walk quickly. You let the dark shape the pace, past the refectory again, where the scent of baked grain still lingers faintly in the stone, past the well, whose rope creaks gently in the wind, past a single open shutter, from which light glows in a thin line across the frost-covered grass. You pause there. Someone is still copying. One monk, head bent, back curved, candle tall. You do not interrupt. You just nod, unseen, and keep moving. The dormitory door gives a reluctant groan. Inside warmth, not much, but enough to remind you that people sleep here, that bodies heat the air, that dreams gather in corners like folded robes. Your cell is near the end of the hall, a wooden door, a low lintel, a single bolt. You unlatch it and step inside. There's no fire here, just a blanket folded neatly over a straw-stuffed mattress, a shelf holding one spare robe, a wooden cup, and a small box. You set the candle into its holder, press the stub into the pool of hardened wax left behind by earlier nights, and sit at the edge of the bed. Your hands still smell faintly of iron ink. You hold them to your face and breathe it in. It's not strong, but it's honest. You untie your belt, fold your robe, and stretch out slowly onto the bedding. The straw shifts with a soft rustle. You adjust your weight until it no longer needs adjusting. Then stillness, not forced, not imposed, just allowed. You stare up at the ceiling beams, dark ribbons across a slightly lighter sky of plaster. You follow one beam from wall to wall, trace it with your eyes, and feel yourself growing heavier by the breath. Then a sound, not inside, outside, snow, not falling hard, just beginning. You hear it first as a hush layered over the wind, then as the faint tick of flake on slate, flake on branch, flake on stone. The whole monastery listens, and you think of the scriptorium again, empty now, dark, but not sleeping. The pages you worked on are still there, stacked, drying. They do not miss you, but they remember you. Every letter you wrote today will outlive you, maybe by a year, maybe by centuries. Someone might read them, or copy them, or scrape them away to make space for new words. But the ink is there, the strokes are there, The silence between lines is there, and that, somehow, feels enough. You turn onto your side. The blanket is coarse, but familiar. The straw crackles, then quiets. You pull the covers over your shoulder and curl slightly inward, hands resting beneath your cheek. A fringe belief, recorded in the margin of a 14th century devotional, claimed that scribes who fell asleep thinking of their work would dream clearer dreams, that the quill, laid down but not forgotten, could guide the mind gently toward rest. You don't know if that's true, but as your breath slows and the candle burns low and the snow continues to fall outside, you feel the letters settling behind your eyes, and your own thoughts begin to curl into the margins. The next morning begins before you open your eyes. You feel at first the shift in the air, colder, slightly sharper, but carrying a stillness that's almost tender. The faint scent of snow mixed with smoke and wool. Somewhere down the hall, a door creaks, footsteps pass, a murmur of voices. The monastery is waking gently, like ink soaking slowly into parchment. You sit up, not abruptly, not even fully, just enough to see your own breath rise faintly in front of your face. You reach for the robe draped across the low stool beside your bed, shake it once to loosen its folds, and wrap it over your shoulders. Your fingers, stiff with sleep, fumble briefly with the tie. It doesn't matter. No one is watching. The candle you forgot to snuff has guttered in the night. Its wax pooled and hardened into a flat oval, like a period at the end of a very long sentence. You leave your room in silence. No bell has rung yet, but you know the rhythm by now. The sky is pale gray, brushed with the blush of snow clouds, not stormy, just full. You cross the courtyard, boots soft against the frost-laced stones. The same fountain sits frozen, its rim dusted with white. No water runs, but the books still breathe. You reach the scriptorium, inside cold, darker than yesterday. No one has lit the lamps yet, but it doesn't feel empty. You walk toward your desk, passing rows of benches still wearing their dust covers. The smell of old ink and waxy parchment still clings to the room, like a shawl the night never quite lifted. When you reach your place, you find your page waiting, right where you left it. The blotting cloth folded neatly, the lines steady, the mouse still curled in the margin. You sit, breathe, stretch your fingers, rub your palms slowly, then reach for your tools. The ink is stiff with cold. You stir it carefully with the back of your quill, watching it relax into motion. Your breath fogs briefly over the page. You pull the inkwell closer and begin to write again. No warm-up, no preamble, just letter as after letter, rejoining the rhythm that waited for you. Today's work is quieter, slower. Your fingers need more coaxing. The parchment is cooler to the touch. Your strokes begin a little narrow, a little dry, but they smooth out, one word at a time. A bell rings softly in the distance. Lauds. You don't move. The bell is not a summons. It's a suggestion, a gentle boundary between before and now. You continue. The next folio you're preparing is for a psalter, a book of psalms, each one ruled and spaced to allow for breathing. The first psalm begins with Beatus Vir, blessed is the man. You draw the B first, larger than the rest, set apart. You won't paint it today. That will come later. But the shape matters. The arc of the loop, the anchor of the stem, the space you leave within its curves. You draw it slowly, letting the nib kiss the page at just the right angle, and pause before adding the smaller letters to follow. There is no rush. Each word is already patient. Later, the illuminator will add vines, maybe a beast or a saint curled inside the letter's belly. But for now, it's yours. You finish the line, then look up. Another scribe has arrived. He nods once, then unpacks his tools without speaking. A candle is lit. The room begins to warm, not with fire, but with intention. It becomes, once again, a place where silence has shape. A fringe manuscript, found in a remote alpine monastery, contains a short paragraph at the bottom of a page, written in smaller hand, almost whispered. It reads, "The ink is a thread, my breath, the needle. This book is not mine, but I pass through it. You understand now. The books are not yours, not the words, not the tools, but you pass through them, and they, in turn, pass through you." The candle beside you has melted into a soft dish of wax. The wick leans slightly, held in place by its own shadow. You dip your quill again, and the ink draws a thread across the page, steady, deliberate, quiet. The script emerges like breath, pressed into form. You're not thinking about how long you've been working. You're only listening to how the letters feel. The parchment stretches comfortably beneath your hand. It has warmed slightly, taking on the heat of your skin, the memory of your wrist's motion. You finish a line and pause. The stillness is complete, not a lack, but a fullness. You close your eyes for a moment, and the text remains behind your lids. You see the shapes, not the meaning, the curves, the rhythm, the pulse of each stroke. You open them again and see a shadow move across the wall. Just a robe, just a figure passing behind you. A monk carrying a tray of blank folios wrapped in linen. He sets them on the shelf near the front of the room and leaves. The door clicks closed behind him, and the scriptorium returns to its breath. You stretch your fingers. The next folio is ready. It needs to be folded. You walk to the side table where a fresh sheet lies flat. The parchment is thick, unmarked. You run your hands along its grain, find the smoothest edge, then fold carefully. The crease must be exact. You use a bone folder, pressing the seam gently, then lifting the leaf to test the fold's memory. It holds 4 pages, back to back, 2 leaves. Soon, it will join the gathering. You return to your bench, slot the folded folio into the stack beneath your workboard, and smooth the top with a small square of wool. Nothing creases, nothing speaks, just the faint drag of cloth across skin. Outside, snow has begun again. You can't see it, but the light has changed, more diffuse. The air inside seems to echo the quiet outside. From the shelf behind you, another scribe pulls a finished gathering. You hear the press creak faintly, pages being flattened, encouraged toward stillness. A low thump as the weight is added, not forceful, just enough to remind the paper of its purpose. You glance across the room and catch sight of an older volume, open at a desk where no one currently sits. Its pages are yellowed, edges curled. The text is larger, more generous. The scribe who made it was confident, or perhaps just tired. The marginalia shows a cat, sleeping in the crook of a monk's arm. Someone centuries ago painted that moment. You smile. Your next letter is a capital. You begin sketching it, not ornate, just deliberate. A soft angle, a strong curve, a small flick at the end, the base for illumination. You don't finish it now, just the outline, just the invitation. Later, it will glow. The bell rings again. None of the scribes move. Vespers, maybe, or none. You can't recall. It doesn't matter. The rhythm is held in the parchment now. It no longer needs keeping. A fringe essay from an 18th century bibliophile claimed that scribes had two hearts, one that beat for prayer and one that beat for line spacing. The author meant it mockingly, but you've begun to think he was right. The page you're working on is nearly done. You finish the last line, dust it lightly, then rest your hand across it, not to weigh it down, but to feel its warmth. This page will go into a psalter bound in oak boards, covered in leather, with two metal clasps and a blue ribbon marker sewn into the spine. You've never seen that book, but you already know it. You set your tools down, one by one, quill, knife, brush, cloth. Then you close the inkwell, not tightly, just enough. The page is placed gently in the press, not too deep, just to set it. The mouse you drew earlier still smiles from the margin, not amused, just resting. The work is finished for the day, but it has not ended. You gather your things and step away from the desk. You don't look back. You'll return tomorrow. The pages will still be here, and so will the silence. The scriptorium dims again as the last candle is snuffed with a quiet pinch. No one announces the day's end. There's no bell to mark final sentences or closing lines. Just the slow rhythm of footsteps departing across stone floors and the low creak of wood settling back into stillness. You step into the corridor once more, drawing your robe a little tighter. The snow has continued. It doesn't fall quickly. It just happens, as if someone were shaking flour gently across the world. The paths are covered now, but not deep. Each footprint from the day has softened, blurred into half shapes. You walk without urgency, leaving only the faintest marks behind. Tonight, instead of returning to your cell, you drift past the cloister toward the chapel. The door is slightly ajar. Inside, it's quiet, not abandoned, reverent. A single lamp burns near the altar, casting amber rings across the floor and up into the arches. You sit in the back, letting the wood take your weight, the silence take your breath. You think about the day, not in events, but in textures, the smooth curve of a vellum fold, the sound of a quill trimming, the shine of fresh ink catching morning light, the brief humor of a sleeping cat drawn in the corner of a saint's sermon, the weight of a half-finished psalm waiting patiently in the press. You think of your hands, thus ink-stained, stiff, quiet. You think of the book that will carry your work long after you're gone, and the monk who will read it centuries later by lamplight, or maybe by sunlight filtered through a dusty window, or maybe not at all. But still, it will sit, it will wait. The work isn't urgent, it's enduring. The chapel grows colder as the oil in the lamp dwindles, a soft pop as the flame flickers. You close your eyes, and now, let your breath ease. Let the snow outside fall without your attention. Let the ink on the page dry fully, quietly, becoming more than just text. It becomes memory. There is nothing left for you to write tonight. No letters, no margins, no repairs to make, only rest. You've done enough. The pages you made today are safe. They are pressed, protected, and waiting. Your desk is tidy, Your tools are in their cloths. The scriptorium is sleeping, and you are allowed to join it. Feel the parchment of your thoughts begin to soften. Let the scroll of your day unfurl and slip gently to the floor. You don't need to hold anything now, not even your own name. Let your hands rest. Let your breath steady. Let your mind settle like a finished folio, creased, bound, and beautifully still. If you find yourself thinking about the quiet sound of quill on page, if you find yourself drifting into the dark corners of a chained library, or hearing the brush of a gold leaf pressed by careful fingers, let those thoughts stay with you. Let them wander through the silence. No hurry, no structure, no end, only the warmth of words held gently in darkness, only the comfort of knowing that even your sleep holds purpose, and when morning comes, the ink will still be waiting.